Well, hello and welcome to Sandbox Summit Global. My name is Paul Brindley. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Music Ally, and welcome to this event. I'm sure most of you probably do know who we are already, but just in case you don't, we describe ourselves these days as a knowledge and skills company, and basically we've been looking at, writing about, advising on, helping various parts of the industry with digital and change within the music business for a couple of decades now. And you can sign up and receive our daily bulletins and all the information that we publish. And I think we will be posting in the chat a link to our sales guy, Anthony, who you should email if you want to discuss the subscription, and check out if you're eligible for some free sponsored subscriptions as well. So yeah, do check that out at musically.com, where you'll also see some write-ups after the event as well. And Sandbox Summit is an event that we've been running in London and New York, and we were hoping, very nearly running in Tokyo earlier this year, but for obvious reasons we couldn't do that. And I guess, like so many others, you know, we decided, look, let's do something a little bit different, and so that's what we're doing. We're doing this event, which I hope we will repeat, which is a new event taking place across the whole week. And I have to give a big thank you to our sponsors, MQA, Chartmetric and Linkfire, for helping us to make this happen. We're very appreciative of your support. Now, just a few things that I wanted to mention before we get going today. The online directory is now live on the website. Again, I think we'll post a link to that in the chat. That's where you can basically register your profile and connect, send messages to other people at the event, and use the access code SSG20. Networking Roulette, these are random one-to-one networking sessions that are taking place every day. They've been pretty popular, and I believe that all we have left is a handful of places on Wednesday, before the session on Wednesday. So I'd grab one of those while you can. Everyone else who's previously registered, please remember to turn up, because otherwise that would be a little bit of a shame. Obviously, we're limited on places for those. Some of the logistics here. Please use the Q&A for questions to speakers after the live sessions. That's the way we're going to be able to incorporate some kind of interactivity with the live sessions. Obviously, when it's recorded, please don't do that. But we're asking all the panelists to stick around for a few minutes after each session so that they can answer your questions in the Q&A. Other elements just to also mention that are taking place that you might not have be so aware of: Meet the Startups tomorrow after the session, which ends with some presentations from 4 startups. Each of those will be hosting their own room, and you'll get a chance to put your questions and meet them. So please note that one down. Again, we'll be publicizing those links. I think they're actually already on the website on the agenda right now, but we'll be publicizing those in the chat. Remember that you have your chance to submit questions to our Ask the Experts marketing panel on Friday, and do please stick around for the last session on Friday, where we will end with our Campaign of the Year award, where it's basically up to you to vote upon the winner. And of course, if you are wanting to tweet about the event, please use the hashtag Sandbox Summit. So let's just take a quick look at what we've got across the 5 days. And as you'll see, there's different themes on every day. And really, when you're running an event such as this, you have to start, I think, with the context of where we are right now and look at how COVID has been impacting on the business. Tomorrow, we focus in on artists as entrepreneurs, with a great interview with K-Camp and Genius, and I'm interviewing Troy Carter and Denzel Fiegelson from Q&A and Platoon. We've got a great managers panel and the startups, lots of stuff. And then we're looking at the future of streaming on day 3. We hone in on some big important platforms, podcasts, TikTok, YouTube, amongst others on day 4. And then finally on day 5, that's when we go behind the campaigns. We have some tips from marketing experts. We have a panel of marketing experts. And yes, we end with the Campaign of the Year award. But we are on the first day. So what have we got for you right now? That'll be coming up. Here we go. So we'll be kicking off with some post-COVID market overviews, tell you about those in a second. We've then got 2 live panels. First one is on the future of streaming. The second one is on, well, the future of streaming in a post-COVID environment. That's the important thing here. How has COVID impacted on streaming? And then how has COVID impacted on marketing? And finally, just a couple of quick-fire thoughts on issues that we should be caring about more in a post-COVID music business. And there's a little reminder there of the networking roulette afterwards at 5:15 UK time. Don't forget to turn up if you book your places. But let's crack on with our first session, which is the post-COVID market overviews. The idea here really was just to set quite a challenge really to all 3 here, and I'm very grateful for them for doing such a great job, which is just 5 minutes each to set the scene, give us a little bit of an update on what's been happening in the particular country or region. So we'll end with Aibee Abidoye from Chocolate City in Nigeria. We'll hear from Xiaoman, the co-founder and COO of Kanjian Music, who are our partners in Music Ally China. But we begin with Noemí Planas from WIN, the global trade body for independent labels, who is going to attempt to sum up the situation in Latin America. So let's hear from Noemí.
Hello, I am Noemí Planas, Network Development Director at WIN. The Worldwide Independent Network connects and supports independent music trade associations globally, focusing on long-term development and sustainability. One of our missions is building associative structures and regional networks, and Latin America is a key area of our work. In recent months, we have often heard that music was one of the first sectors most affected by COVID and will be one of the last to recover from it. This is especially true for Latin America. The region's GDP had been growing at a slow pace since long before the pandemic, but is now likely to suffer a 10-year setback. Countries like Chile were already crippled by last year's social unrest and were only beginning to recover when the virus hit. Several Latin territories are experiencing the longest quarantines in the world, with full lockdowns throughout July. At the time of recording, live concerts are not yet allowed in Mexico or Colombia, apart from some sporadic drive-ins. In other territories they are, but with heavy restrictions that make them financially unviable. Uruguay is one of the few examples that managed to control the pandemic and was able to allow the return of a gradual normalization of activities in June. But the impact on the music industry is being felt more intensely here than in other territories. Some examples. In Argentina, local trade association ACR estimates the loss of revenue of record labels at more than 50% on average. 80% of them had to postpone recordings due to the pandemic and will have to lay off 1.7 employees on average. A survey conducted by DataSim in March reported an impact of more than $565 million and 1 million professionals affected in Brazil, with 80% of the events cancelled or postponed. In Chile, according to the Observatorio Digital de la Música Chilena, over 90% of shows had to be suspended. An annual economic decline of more than 41% is estimated for 2020, and about 80% of music companies risk layoffs and bankruptcy in the coming months. Despite the setbacks, the music sector has responded and delivered inspiring content that is helping us through the crisis. But it is also questioning many of its models and putting a magnifying glass on the deficiencies that we already knew, such as the structural precariousness of streaming. Many Latin music companies relied heavily on live revenues, and without the possibility of playing shows, the digital value gap has become even more apparent. Cultural and creative industries need support mechanisms and the development of stimulus measures, as the financial sustainability of the sector is in jeopardy. But despite calls for governments to approve specific plans, their responses have been uneven and generally not sufficient throughout the Latin American region. This pandemic has reinforced the importance of the role of trade associations in raising public awareness and fighting for better conditions for music professionals. The absence of representation in key territories such as Mexico, Colombia, and Peru has deprived the sector of an effective dialogue with their governments. Therefore, no sector-specific plans have been approved, with cultural music being the least of their priorities. And where general support measures were made available, the lack of business and artist censuses and the fact that the Black economy is still huge meant that many were unable to benefit from them. To lay the foundations for a lasting recovery beyond the current crisis, production proximity models should be promoted, considering the small and micro enterprises that make up the independent music industry, fostering professionalization and capacity building. More than ever, international cooperation is proving essential to respond to the pandemic and will be even more vital in the aftermath. It is crucial to guarantee the exchange of knowledge and experiences through decentralized cooperation. An example is WIN's LATAM Network Working Group, where the organization's staff, our associations in the region, and individuals in key territories are working together to assist in associative efforts and with advocacy by sharing helpful information and resources. Despite all the challenges facing the Latin American region, I am confident that independence as a global player with significant transformative and convening power will lead to a better, stronger, and more inclusive reconstruction of the music industry after this pandemic. Thank you.
大家好, hello everyone. I hope you are well and safe. I'm Xiaoman Zhou, co-founder of Kanjian Music. A big thank you to Music Line for this opportunity to share with you more about what is the situation in China today. A brief word about Kanjian Music. We are a music service company. We offer our partners everything from licensing through artist and brand management to business consulting. We were the first to experience the virus, but we were also the first to go back to work. The government here made big decisions, used technology, and a lot of people helped. Today, China is virus free. Not many people want to travel outside China, so they spend their money here. It helps the economy recover faster. Because of the virus, many conferences went digital, and so did we. In China, from July 17th to July 19th, more than 2.5 million music fans and industry professionals went online and to watch the International Indie Music Season. We call it IIMS. IIMS, which we co-hosted, is China's first ever digital music industry event. 3 days of online panels, presentations, and music showcases. IIMS will be running for the rest of 2020, and we are already planning for next year. We hope to do a mix and digital and real-life event. All things considering, 2020 has been a good year for China's digital music business so far. And Tencent 40 million paying users is a great treatment for this. Similarly, our own data shows that revenue from licensing follows the trend of the last few years, steadily growth. Publishing in China has been a hot topic for a few years, and I would like to highlight that this is not really any news. We have been helping our partners collecting publishing royalties directly from the DSP since 2016. We also generate additional revenue for them through a streamlined process for a cover song clearance and sync. I can say that we and China's music business as a whole has not really been affected by the virus. On that note, China is very quick to move online and start live streamings, as you know. On platforms like FUGA and Bilibili, musicians hosted their performance and received directly income from fans through digital gifting. In bigger cities like Shanghai, clubs shows start again in March. Recently, even in Wuhan, wherever citizens has been tested for COVID, thousands of people gathered in an open-air water park for an electronic music festival without any masks. Can you imagine it? Last but not least, artist collaborations have been a very effective way to show up in China. Our recent collaborations between Xu Mengyuan and Latvia producer Top was a big success. Talking about collaborations, I would like to showcase our Super Plus project. Go to kanjian.com to check out our collection introduce Chinese music, ancient and modern. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you all for joining us today. Once again, many thanks to the Sandbox for having me and Kanjian Music. Stay safe. 再见.
Hi, my name is Abidoye. I'm the EVP of Music at Chocolate City Music in Lagos, Nigeria. I'll be speaking on the state of the music business in Nigeria post-COVID. Before I go into my topic, I would like to thank Music Ally for having me on this panel. I hope to shed a little bit of light on the effects of COVID and how music businesses in Nigeria specifically are performing. Before COVID, majority of the revenue that came from music businesses were from artist services, so what we call live performances, brand endorsements, artist appearances, and additional services that usually fall under the management sphere of revenue. But for record labels and recorded music, revenue streams were basically streamlined to physical revenue, which was largely affected by piracy and distorted distribution channels. And the other bulk of the revenue came from telco companies who had music streaming platforms that provided revenue through CRBTs, downloads, and of course streaming. Because data is still expensive, streaming has always has been steadily growing, but was still not a match for the revenue that came from live music and other artist services. With COVID sort of disrupting the nature of things here in Nigeria, and I would say maybe most of the other parts of Africa, because that takes up about 60 to 80% of the revenue that actually comes into music businesses. Most practitioners and stakeholders in the business have had to adjust. And the question has been, how do we run our music businesses in an environment where data is expensive, we have to go digital, and most of the revenue comes from live music. So what happened is, for corporations and companies, they had to look inward and say, how do we streamline the operation so that we have enough money to function as a business? How do we create content that we can release now so that we have revenue coming in? So that changed the dynamic of the business, where instead of working with release calendars, we just were looking to churn out as much content as we could in a short amount of time to bring in enough revenue so that we could keep the business afloat. On the DSP end, because a lot of people had postponed their releases, it gave a lot of African artists, and I would say, I think I can say this specifically for, there was a lot of content from the continent that came out about this time. Jerusalema, Love Wanting Team by CK, we had Haba by Black Bones, we had Oxalate. A lot of people were just releasing content at this time because the DSPs were just hungry to get any content because release calendars were being held back. So what happened is it gave a lot of independent artists, and I would say artists generally from Africa, an opportunity to really put out content at this time. What happened with live music? Obviously, because there was no money coming in with live music, a lot of businesses had to shut down. And because everyone was going online, what we had was, it felt like DJs were leading the way in sort of driving this community online. So DJs would go on IG Live and do sets, you know, every Friday night. People would go gather and just generally enjoy themselves. And then DJs ended up inviting a few artists to come on, and then virtual concerts, which is a concept that we see sort of creeping into the industry, have sort of been, I would say, somewhat embraced. The question has just been, what is the revenue model if this is something that we're going to continue? How do you actually charge people when data is still expensive? How many people can you get online? If you're going to do it, how much money do you actually need to spend? Do you need to get sponsors? So the dynamic for that virtual concerts is still something that people are trying to figure out, but there's definitely a lot more engagement and openness for people to engage in online and virtual concerts. There was the attempt at drive-through concerts, which didn't go quite well. We ended up having people coming out of their cars and actually dancing, and so social distancing rules were difficult to maintain. But in Nigeria, our collection management system is still not as sophisticated, where you have distribution going effectively. So revenue that could have come at that time to support artists was basically non-existent. Live music revenue is still very much low at this time. Recorded music is sort of where most of the revenue is coming, even though what we're seeing is that because the revenue coming from Africa, the rates are much lower than revenue that's generated in the UK or the US. What's happening is that you're finding a lot more collaboration between African artists and artists that are international, so that they can tap into the international revenue base to increase the actual revenue that comes in into the business. So those are the dynamics of what's going on. That's the effect of COVID. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more investment into digital content, people just having a stronger presence online, growing that super community so that when content is released, it's released to a specific base that you know would buy. And there'll be a lot more foray of the African market into the international market through collaborations. And that's about it for me. I hope that gave you a nice insight into what's going on in Africa. And we encourage more investment, more collaboration here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed those three presentations. Thanks to every one of you for setting the scene there and giving some quite interesting contrasts from different parts of the globe. So we're on to our first panel, and as I mentioned, to kick this off, we're just going to have a short presentation with a few observations from Chartmetric, our supporters and sponsors for the event. So I'm going to hand over to Chaz Jenkins, and Chaz, welcome, and please share your observations with us, enlighten us.
Excellent, thanks ever so much, Paul. We've prepared a short presentation to give you an idea of some of the trends that we've actually seen emerge in the marketplace over what now is really the past 6 months. And so hopefully everybody can see my screen, and I'm depending on Paul to say yes if that's the case. Paul?
Not quite yet.
Not quite yet. I'll try again. Let's just try share again. Desktop.
That's better.
That's better. Excellent. Okay. Great. So if we're to use one word to really describe what's happened and what we've seen happen in the marketplace this year, it would probably be volatile. Volatile in the sense that lots of trends which have been taking place and developing over recent years have suddenly gone into overdrive in 2020, particularly since the start of lockdowns. And at the same time, lots of old ways of doing things, or lots of things which seem to work for people in the past and people seem to build into or their day-to-day activities, seem to have diminished in their impact. I mean, looking individually at possibly the most important trends, I mean, first of all, just in terms of what we're listening to, you know, where we listen to music, when we listen to music, why we listen to music, and crucially, what we listen to, has changed fundamentally over the course of the year. And the impact on listening was almost immediate. As soon as the world started going into lockdowns in the middle of March, there was a fundamental shift in terms of how people were streaming music. You know, it was most noticeable, for instance, in terms of the genres of music people were listening to. Genres such as hip hop and pop, typically which grow in the spring and summer. You know, year in, year out, there were certain genres of music which grow in terms of their listening throughout the year and then shrink. Pop and hip hop both typically grow in the spring, but they both immediately went into decline along with a lot of other genres when lockdown started. At the same time, certain other genres of music increased significantly because, you know, well, for a number of reasons. People are looking for music for solace maybe, but people are looking for music to listen to whilst they work, and people aren't commuting. And so there's fundamental changes there in terms of how people are listening to music. You know, since then, as we moved on into the summer, there's been a readjustment, you know, not necessarily a normalization, if anything, a new normal. You know, the shape of the market in terms of what people are listening to and why people are listening to music is slightly different than it was before. You can't talk about what's happened since COVID, since the start of COVID, without looking at video. You know, the influence that video has had on what people are streaming has been profound this year. You know, in particular, of course, TikTok, you know, and other UGC platforms, but also there's been significant growth, of course, in usage of streaming video on demand services, Netflix, Amazon, and Disney. And the music on those platforms is influencing the music on streaming services. But it's really important to note that none of these are native music platforms. They're not platforms which consumers are using necessarily to listen to music, but they are discovering music in these platforms and sharing music. Now, TikTok is, of course, in the news all the time. Everybody's obsessed with TikTok, and rightly so, because it is phenomenally influential. But it's also worth noting that there are very, very few musicians who really have a particularly large footprint on TikTok. Most effective TikTok influencers are social media personalities, movie stars, you know, and consumers as well. For music to really, when music makes an impact through video platforms, typically it's not on the basis of spend or even a single influencer, but it's mass international trending amongst users of these platforms. Also looking at live streaming, I mean, live streaming cropped up just a minute ago in the talk about Nigeria. You know, it is undoubtedly growing, and there are artists who are gradually figuring out how to use live streaming really effectively to retain audience engagement. You know, we're not necessarily seeing any sort of evidence of artists really effectively using live streaming yet to grow their audience base in the same way that you'd expect traditional live events or festivals to do. But it will probably come as people learn how to use these platforms more effectively and more services start up dedicated to live streaming of music. And finally, overall, you know, there's an increasing correlation between what is happening on social metrics, international reach of artists, and streaming services. You know, in a sense, you know, it sounds counterintuitive. Now, half the world is locked down and not able to see their friends, not able to go to events or go out or socialize. But in many ways, we are socializing more than we've ever done before, because consumers around the world are using social networks much more, and they're sharing things. They're sharing news, and in many cases, they're sharing music as well. And there is greater correlation than we've ever identified before between what is artists who are emerging on socials and streaming services, particularly when you look at an international level. Because, you know, as is the example with TikTok, to make things happen in these platforms, you need to, in general, reach a bigger audience than is just supported by any individual country. And at the same time, conversely, traditional ways of doing things, all of those traditional tools which we use to promote music, naturally they've diminished in terms of their impact. Media, events, touring, none of this is able to take place. But despite that, many things are growing. We've seen more emerging artists really grow their audience this year than ever before, which sort of leads on to one final thought. When we looked at the very top of the market, what is happening in the global top 200, we didn't find what we were expecting. Further down the market, there was so much change. There was so much viral growth of content. Yet right at the very top, it's almost complete stagnation. What we did was, this is figures for the global top 200 across a number of services. And on the right-hand side, you can see 15th of September, the number of tracks in the top 200 globally released within the last 30 days, just 29. Almost half the number of tracks almost half the number of new tracks which were in the top 200 a year before. In actual fact, over the past few years, the trend has been for the top 200 tracks globally at any one time to include more new content. There's higher turnover of content right at the top. That seems to have stopped in 2020. And if we actually look at the average age of tracks in the top 200, it's grown significantly. I should point out here, we've removed really deep catalogue. Anything released in the 1970s, etc., which would skew these figures, is removed. But we find that the average age of tracks in the top 200 globally currently is 289 days, compared to 183 days a year ago. Tracks in the top have got much older. And hell, do the math. 289 days ago was not 2020, it was 2019, long before the pandemic started. So perhaps in this discussion, we might find out a little bit more about what's happening. Thanks, everyone.
Indeed, thanks very much, Chaz. And I will hand over right now to Anna Siegel from FUGA, who will introduce our fabulous panel. So, Anna, I'm hoping you're there. I think you are.
Hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, all good.
All right. Thank you for having us. Good afternoon, good morning, good midnight for those of you dialing in from across the globe. It is really exciting to be the first panel of this event, and I mentioned to Paul a big thanks for putting an agenda together that really addresses our current state of things. This has been everyone's top talking point for the past few months, and I think it really benefits us as an industry to come together and dive in deeper into what this is going to look like. And so our panel is very much focused on the future of streaming post-COVID, but I think, of course, looking at the current data, looking at our current sort of reality is very much where we might need to start. I think why streaming, to get started, I want to actually introduce the panel. If you just dialed in, we have just heard from Chaz Jenkins, the CCO of Chartmetric, the music industry's sort of data Bible. He's given us some really interesting sort of touching points that we'll dive into in the panel. Also joining is Amaechi Uzoigwe, the manager and business partner of Run the Jewels and Songhoy Blues. His music industry experience, I think, covers everything from management, label, founder, publishing, live. He will be giving us the whole 360 view on everything we're discussing. And Cindy James, head of commercial marketing at Caroline Capital Music Group, which is an independent subset of Universal Music Group. Her background is actually still with streaming as the Vice President of Streaming and Playlisting Strategies with Island Records, and prior to that as a more international streaming marketing role with Sony Music. So yeah, I mean, why is the future of streaming so interesting in this post-COVID reality? I think, you know, I don't know about you guys, but the second COVID came up and people were losing their jobs and the economy was on its head, a lot of folks who didn't know about the music industry or didn't know about digital were sort of coming to me wondering if my job was safe, interestingly enough. And, you know, actually it's nuanced. It's unknown, I think, what exactly is going to be the full repercussions of this world. And so, you know, one thing we know though is that the start of everything brought, you know, millions of users online at a huge increase. So, you know, one report I just recently pulled up in the UK, there were, you know, people over 54 were spending 36% more time online. So previously, as music industry folks, labels would have to split their time between figuring out their live, figuring out their physical, you know, press tours, travel, you know, artists were having to worry about how they looked when they left the house, and a lot of that has been taken out of our sort of bandwidth, and everything is about digital. You know, I just do digital streaming or digital distribution, and my inbox has probably increased by 100% because everyone in our network is cleaning up their catalog, making sure they get everything on TikTok, making sure everything's live on Facebook, you know, managing claims in YouTube at a faster rate. Everyone is focused on digital streaming. And they probably should have been this whole time, but what does this mean for us? And will this sort of have positive, negative outcomes? So yeah, kicking off, I wanted to sort of quickly jump into that last sort of point that Chaz had in his slides about the charts, and really kick this one to Cindy about sort of why do we think that music has been staying on the charts for longer? Why has the music at the top sort of stayed stagnant in this post-COVID reality? And is that going to maintain?
Yeah, hey everyone, Chaz, that was a great presentation. I think it is here to stay. I think we're seeing, for the first time, we're really starting to see how people are consuming with music. When we were in the CD format, we never had insight into how people listen to music, whether they'd put the CD on, they'd go to track 3, they'd go to track 7, how many times they listen on repeat. And what we're seeing, well, just from my lens, because we're working 11 of those top 200 tracks, what's really interesting is 6 of those tracks are new. They're under 9 months old. And 5 of those tracks are actually over 2 years old. And the way that people are consuming both those new tracks and the older tracks is it's significantly over-indexing in search and significantly over-indexing in repeat listens from people's users' collection and their own library. And the average streams from editorial playlists, like the today's top hits of the world, is under 25%. So when you have a look at those 6 new songs and you're generating under 25% of streams from the biggest flagship playlists, and the streams are over-indexing from search and own collection, it just shows that the importance of people leaning forward and adopting to your music and streaming on repeat is going to have that long tail effect. And that long tail effect is what we're really seeing within the streaming age and the chart stagnation at the moment too.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think early on, one of the things reported on was sort of the delay in release. So a lot of top artists who had, you know, huge marketing money put into their campaign were postponing in the hopes that this would all end really quickly, and then they could release later. And I think a few of those have started to release. Like I know Alicia Keys had put her release on hold, and now it's just recently come out. And I noticed a few others. I wonder if there's an even simpler answer, like is that top tier artist and the mechanism for which the marketing sort of sits around their release sort of just slowing down the turnover on that, on what sits at the top, and does that then create sort of leveler playing field for artists that are self-releasing? And this goes out to actually any of you to answer, because I know we work across data and independent artists strategies, and yeah.
I think what we're seeing is sort of like we're so used to thinking of the charts as the place which is now, you know, and if you wanted to influence the very top charts in each country, you know, in the old days, you needed to be on radio, you needed to be on TV, it was new releases, and that's what influenced the top of the charts. Now, in a sense, all the activity is below the charts, and you could almost, I might get shot down, I might get into trouble for saying this, but what's in the top 200 was what was happening yesterday, because it's the things which have, you know, bubbled and burned and made it so hot that they've actually crossed over into just mainstream media, and they've reached the very top. They're in today's top hits and all the big playlists. And the action has actually moved on months beforehand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Amaechi, you are used to taking artists on press tours and, you know, being really in the nitty gritty of this kind of release cycle. What does this all mean to you?
Well, it depends on the artist, it depends on their team, it depends on the label, it depends on the attitude, it depends on a lot of things. I think in general, it caused obviously a massive slowdown, as we've already addressed in different ways. And that's still going on. It's like somebody just poured a giant jar of molasses over the entire industry pretty much. And everything is taking time. A lot of the big acts, they held fire. They didn't go out, they didn't drop their records, because this is an ecosystem we're talking about with a lot of critical pillars to it that have been immobilized and rendered ineffectual. So for those big artists, they need those pillars driving their projects. And if they're not there, then why release your record? I think that speaks to a degree what Chaz was saying about this new music coming and those big stars being of the past. But I think they're only of the past because they temporarily abdicated the space. And so did the machine. When COVID lifts, you're going to see an explosion of music from the big guys, as well as all these younger artists who found new footing, right? I think that's a huge factor. We're dealing with right now externalities that are affecting our behaviors. As soon as those externalities change, the behaviors will change. So what we're seeing now isn't necessarily the new normal, I would say. It's absolutely part of that dialectic towards what will be the future, right? But I think, you know, it's for someone like Run the Jewels. We had an album ready to go. It was the biggest album of the guy's career. We literally shot a massive video a week before the country went into lockdown. We didn't know this was all going to happen. And we had a choice. Do we wait, or do we just F it and go for it, right? And, you know, and the way we built our operation, it's multiple. It's more of an enterprise. So while we lost a global tour with Rage Against the Machine, we have multiple verticals that allowed us to still lean into the campaign. And it was a calculated decision to do it. And we went for it, and so far it's turned out pretty well. But I think it is a lot about the ability to weather the storm. And you're going to see a lot of acts, established acts, who may not come back the same way. They may not be able to get the footing again, right? And you saw a lot of new acts who were poised. And then COVID hit and erased them and erased a lot of possibilities for them. But also you've seen a lot of acts come out of nowhere globally. People have so much more time to stay home and check out music, right? You're seeing so much more discovery internationally. And I think that's only going to continue.
Yeah, interesting. And thanks for sharing that story about the Run the Jewels release. I can imagine that must have been like a hot debate, but we need the music. I'm glad it came out. Yeah. Speaking, two things you touched on that I think Cindy might weigh in on with quite a bit of intelligence, both the machine. So you said there's like, you know, a machine behind a release plan. One, I want to dive into what that machine looks like now. You know, what is the release plan now? What are we looking at? How do artists engage? And then two, you know, and I think everyone can speak to this, but behavior, you know, what do we know about user behavior and streaming these days that's different? Cindy, if you want to sort of jump in on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think the user behavior is drastically changing during COVID right now. We're seeing a competition of time. Firstly, is people are waking up later. They're generally waking up like averaging around 8:30 in the morning, or cutting out that commute time, cutting out the music time that they'd listen at the gym. They're also going to bed later. But something that everyone's touched on, which is really interesting, is just the amount of different media formats that are being consumed across TikTok, TV, background TV, etc. So there's a competition for time right now. And what we're seeing from that is that paid subscription is growing like crazy. Paid subscription in Q2 this year completely outpaced Q1. And in the US, we're on track. If paid subscription keeps up, we're on track to exceed 2019's number by $1 billion. So the industry is growing. People are consuming more music, more content than ever before. It's competitive. But one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting in behavior is voice. And a lot of people are buying smart speakers and voice activated devices. But not only are they introducing them in the home, but they're spreading them out in the home. So you're having multiple devices in every single room. And one of the things that I think was really interesting about Chaz's presentation is just the volume of consumption that's happening, which plays to the repeat listens in the chart, is that when you have so much background music, ambient music, you have so much choice, and you have a voice device that you can just ask what it to play, is you start to get lost on what to ask. And it changes your behavior because you start to interact with a voice device very differently. So the way that you would ask a question to a voice device is very different to how you would type a keyword into Google, for example. So some of the areas when you think about the machine, some of the areas that you can optimize that is making sure that you're optimizing your websites for voice as opposed to keywords, making sure that you're thinking about how people are going to be asking for your music or asking about your artists, so that recommendation is raised. Also thinking about clean versions. So clean versions are back, and that's largely because of the parental controls in a voice speaker. So when a family is setting up a voice speaker device, it's super easy to turn on the parental controls. And if the family doesn't know, or someone's listening to a top pop flagship playlist and parental controls are on, that explicit song just won't play. And because you don't have a speaker, you don't know that that song's getting completely skipped over. Or even if you're asking for a song and there's only an explicit version, it just won't play. That's another thing to really think about in terms of living in this voice device world. Also think about the title of your songs. So again, coming back to that big machine, I have an example of an artist that we work who came from TikTok, and he hadn't released anything before. He didn't have a face at that time. We had a lot of brand awareness to do. And the song was called Illy, which stood for I Love You. And when you're thinking about it, how I interact with voice devices, it was actually a remake of Frankie Valli's Can't Take My Eyes Off You. But the hook is I Love You, Baby. I was like, this is crazy. No one's going to be able to find it, especially people looking through playlists or want to ask for the song. So we actually retitled the song to Illy, which is for the TikTok audience, so they know what it is. But in order for mass, if we're taking that song to radio, to know what the song is, parentheses, I Love You, Baby. So that's just some different tactics that a big machine is thinking about in how people are engaging with platforms and devices, and then how you optimize your releases for that. And then I think lastly, when we're talking about different content that's coming back, fitness bikes like Peloton are exploding right now too. That's bringing instrumentals back, which is really exciting. So you just got to think about how people are consuming content, engaging with content, and change your formats.
Yeah, I think Peloton's a really interesting one to look at. Like they've got artist-specific rides they do, you know, and it's attached to a device, but they also have a website. But those are the types of experiences that we haven't really yet focused on. That now all of a sudden everyone needs their music on Peloton. You know, like it's like what is next? What is the next sort of device out there that's going to be driving streaming in our new reality? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I have a thought on that, and I think it's already here. It just hasn't really been exploited in a way on the music side that effectively, and that is video games, because that audience is so infinitely larger than music can ever hope to be. It's not even comparable, you know, in audience size, in revenue, and all of that, right? And music's, if the music industry doesn't develop a real gaming strategy that's more comprehensive and robust and interesting fast, they're going to lose out on a lot, because that's where the culture is going, right? Music is of course part of every aspect of the culture, but it's also the least it's the least valued in monetization and the scale of monetization. You could take every entertainment bucket that exists, put it next to video gaming, and video gaming is still bigger, you know? So that's where the audience is, that's where the money is, and that's where the youth is. Really, you know, there are more people on Twitch than there are in any music platform.
Yeah, and actually,
so I think that's critical.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the stats on sort of sports consumption, and actually, like, sports may be down, but esports is on the rise. Huge. Because you need that actual audience feel, you need a community feel, and not just a team, right? And so esports has these, you know, historically sort of huge Super Bowl of esports events they do with all these gamers, but they're used to being online. So it's not actually a switch, this has just freed up more time for them. In their lives to game and probably brought on new users.
We did a bit of research last year called Trigger Cities, where we looked at the social growth of new artists amongst countries internationally, and how certain places geographically were much more viral in terms of the push they gave to new artists. We're working on a concept as well, trigger demographics, because there's certain demographics whose behavior is the same, certain age profiles where consumers are just, if you can get into that consumer demographic, they will promote you really effectively. And there's a trigger girls demographic and a trigger boys demographic, and both are quite distinct. They have different interests, they're slightly different ages. One of the interesting facets about the trigger boys demographic, which is typically around about male 18 to 24, is curiously, amongst their other interests, there's not sports. Even at a global scale, we don't see soccer as one of their major interests. Video games, most definitely, is a major interest of that music demographic. So yeah.
That Trigger Cities blog is incredible, so I definitely recommend everyone reading that. One of the things that Amaechi just touched on, which I think is really interesting in the streaming and the voice world, is just that youth audience, because you guys, I'm sure, will all remember as a teenager, you become a fanatic with music. You listen to every lyric, every line, every beat, you know it word for word. But when you're in this access all landscape and you have so much choice and you don't know what to listen to, you tend to go back to the songs that you're obsessed with when you're younger. So now that's an investment for the future. If you can get that youth hooked on your music and as a fanatic for your music in the long term, that's what people are going to go back to when they get a little bit older or become more of a casual, not looking for as much new music.
Yeah, interesting. And I think, you know, this discussion sort of can't come without sort of talk about social media and the way that sort of, you know, I mean, it's been a while now that we're looking at like platforms like Facebook and TikTok as, you know, the new music consumption spaces, right? And whether you categorize a lot of these as UGC or social media or an intersection of the two, it's clear that, you know, for an artist to sort of succeed on there, they need a different type of stickiness. So I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on sort of how, as a sort of force behind the scenes, you're encouraging artists or noticing artists succeed or fail on those platforms now that they're becoming so much a forefront. And just referencing to a sandbox, I think that was in New York about 1.5 years ago, it was all about authenticity in the artist's approach to these. At least that's my takeaway. You know, how does an artist sort of present themselves as authentic and sort of raw and close to the fan in the way they sort of talk to you on these platforms. So I'd love to talk both about artists that are succeeding, but then also artists that maybe don't have opportunity to succeed in this space. And what does the reality look for each of those sort of profiles?
I can speak to that briefly. I mean, I have 2 artists who are like the opposite of one another when it comes to social media. One are just naturals at it, and they're funny and they're engaging and they talk about all sorts of stuff, and that's on their direct channels. It's not on the band channel, you know, it's them, right? And that's authentic, that's real. People feel like they're connected to them. And the other act isn't really that. They appreciate social media, they understand it, they get its importance, right? They are just not that inclined to use it themselves personally to engage. They're just from a different culture, they look at things differently, they have different things they stress. But you have to have a strategy. You absolutely have to. And the fact of the matter is some artists are just better at it than other artists. They're more social, they're extroverts, they're funny, they have great sense of humor, they're all they know how to get a comment, just like people, you know? And the ones that don't have that knack need a different sort of strategy. You know, there are a lot of shy artists and they don't feel comfortable putting themselves out like that or being on it every single day and talking. So you have to look at them differently and develop a strategy about it. But if you're not engaging with your audience, if they don't feel like they have a connection with you online of some sort, you know, and to each his or her own, just have a presence. Do something that's interesting. Do something that has tangibility to it, that your audience, and remember, it's about your audience. It's about your fans. So if you're not talking to them, if you're not connecting with them, then you're not really showing them any love. So to expect love in return is a little bit irrational.
Yeah, for sure. And what are some of the, I mean, I guess moving to sort of like live performance streaming, you know, where are we seeing that going? Where has that sort of succeeded and where in the future? I mean, like I keep getting my parents sending me links to sort of operas that they're watching, you know? Is this opening up for real or is this just
absolutely? It absolutely is. But what we're seeing now is 1.0. What you're going to see next year, there's tremendous innovation happening on the DNA level of the technology and what the technology can do online. It's pretty limited, right? Run the Jewels, we're touring and live is a huge part of their profile, and the success hasn't done one show yet because we don't feel comfortable with the level of the technology out there being able to represent that live show the way it should be. That said, we are doing a TV special instead. So that should be fun. And that, you know, to look at what's happening now, I mean, how many ticketed platforms are there? There's no real revenue. That will change next year. There's no real, you know, virtuality to it because it has to have some virtuality to it, right? Because you're looking at the potential of an artist having 500,000, 1 million people at their virtual show, right? And that gives, you know, artists and management and the teams options in the future to say, all right, do I need to spend 6 weeks on the road to make X amount of money? Or can I do it in one night? It doesn't mean it's going to replace touring, but it's going to give artists and their teams options because as we know, coming out of COVID, the promoters have already let it be known that they're going to grind the artists. They're going to cut their guarantees. They're going to make it so hard for them to ever get back to the point where it was, right? So artists have to look at other ways to create revenue because the part of the business that's been totally devastated is touring. Recorded music actually hasn't been hit that hard, comparatively speaking, to a lot of other industries, but touring has been wiped out. And a lot of people have lost their jobs and their futures, et cetera, et cetera. So it's incumbent upon us, especially on the artist side, and to figure out new ways to monetize this that aren't simply dependent on what other people platforms. And we're always at the sort of beck and call or at the mercy of all these platforms. And I think artists just sort of need to get creative again and be creative, because you could just have a freaking camera like this. If what you're doing is that cool, if it's that interesting and engaging the audience, at some point they won't care, right? As long as it's cool and engaging and creative. And I think it's all about creativity for the artist community and understanding where technology is going and understanding how to leverage that to their advantage. And I think we're going to see a lot of input globally from new markets coming online who think differently about the space. And I think that's, to me, very exciting.
Yeah, I think it's my answer to your two previous questions will be exactly the same. You need people to share. It's sort of like the technology is there, you know, socials exist. An artist doesn't need to be on socials, you know, provided their audience is sharing their music on socials. Now that means in general that the artist does need to be on socials. but you've got to get your audience to share. And the same thing applies to live streaming. Live streaming is a way to retain the attention of your fans. That's fine, but there's always a necessity to grow and retain an audience. And live streaming could be absolutely fantastic at this, but it needs to be built into a much wider social strategy. And it's not that this is difficult. You know, streaming services themselves are essentially social networks, just with a lot of the functionality of social networks disabled. You know, that's the way consumers use social networks. They share playlists with their friends. That's how things grow. We obsess in the industry about editorial playlists, but really all the action is amongst fans' playlists, people sharing music. And there's nothing new there, because it was exactly the same when I was a kid. My taste in music was influenced by my friends, but I only had 4 of them. Not because of my friends, it was 1980. You know, there was no internet, there was no social.
I mean, that's a really good point. Oh, sorry, Anna.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think you made a good point just around live streaming and your audience, and making sure that you're collecting your audience along the way. I see so many posts of artists saying, I'm going live at this time. Yeah. I'm like, cool, okay, I got to convert the time zones. I got to put a reminder in. I've got to remember, I really want to watch this. And then 5 days pass and I completely forget to go back. So I think what I found really interesting is when when artists create behaviors and they go live at the same time every night, or they go live on multiple platforms. So then that way they're activating the notifications across Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, because people engage with the social platforms in a different way. So if you're able to collect audiences, remind them, and find different ways to notify them, you're going to have a much better attendance rate and retention as well. Because live streaming right now is all about the brand building of it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of actually an inspiring moment, you know, for everyone to get their house in order and come out stronger from it. So in that sense, we've only got a few more minutes left, and I do want to make sure that you all stick around to answer the Q&A in the chat. I already see it going off. I see people in the chat. I love it. It's interactive. We're on a live streaming platform right now. This is social media, so keep up the interaction. But my last question is very blue sky. What from all of this is for the greater good, and what's going to come out of this that we have not yet seen that I think benefits the music industry and music consumption as a whole? Go, and feel free to put thoughts in the chat as well. You know, like what is the world like as we know it, for the better, because we've come here.
I think we're going to see and hear better artists and better music and more interesting stuff, because to your point, like, we've had to reset. It's been this massive slowdown. Housekeeping's in order. Artists are learning how to actually market, because they have no choice. They have to sit there and figure it out and try and be clever, but they're also working they're collaborating globally. They're checking out other stuff. Influences are going to impact the music. These influences are going to impact the music that we see in a year from now. And I think that is going to be really fascinating. You know, one of the, on The View from Nigeria, this speaker earlier was talking about how those artists are collaborating with international artists because that's where the monetization is, because it isn't in Africa. But, you know, you're also just seeing awesome creativity between these different artists. And it could be a producer in one country and a singer or a rapper or whatever in another country. And those audiences are starting to discover each other too. So I just think it's going to be, I hope that it's going to be driven, post-COVID will be driven a lot by that sort of new creativity and new music.
Border breakdowns, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I think definitely the choice and access. So right now, we have the ability to access this panel, where historically it's only been in New York or London. And I think the fact that this is now global is just testament to the fact that people want to be able to access things more. And that very much plays back into the streaming landscape, where it's just access, and live streams access.
Yeah. And to that point, and let me just say briefly, access is critical, and not all of the world has access. There's a lot of the world that still isn't online, right? Or can't afford streaming services, right? So the streaming pie is actually much smaller now than it was going to be, and it's going to decentralize once these other markets, really like Africa, when a third of Africa is online, when half of Africa is online, when 3/4 of it's online, you're going to see way more African music rise to the top, right? Look at Puerto Rico, look at Latin America, look at India and Asia. As connectivity came, the artists rose, right? Of those local markets. So the days of Western superstars dominating everywhere, I think, are pretty much over. Everyone's going to have their superstars, the BTSs of the world. The Puerto Rico alone represents like a ridiculous proportion of success in music, right? So I'm excited about that too. I want to see all this other new stuff come, and it will with infrastructure, investment. In America, there are a lot of people who can't afford streaming. People don't really, we're so used to just making this assumption that it's affordable for everyone. It is absolutely not. Music, and this is all smaller than the culture, it's a reflection of the culture. In America now, you have poor kids during COVID who are stuck at home and don't have access to the internet.
Yeah,
right?
and therefore
so you have a
not
massive
school,
digital
not music.
divide.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
It's a huge problem, and I guess it'll force more innovation around there. Chaz, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd agree with everything. What's happened over the past 6 months has accelerated change at an incredible rate. Many of the things which have taken place this year so far were already going to take place, but further down the line, and it's just everything's been compacted. And I think in part it's because people have been forced to ditch or to park a lot of the old ways of doing things and find new solutions. And where people haven't been able to find new solutions, they've sort of like gone into the slow lane, but other people are coming through. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next year as the live business comes back, because, you know, it's not that the live business has gone away. There are people still working, they're innovating, they're trying to figure out how they're going to come back in a resilient way. And so, yeah, there's a lot of innovation taking place. And I think and I think music's benefiting. Artists can benefit, but of course, let's not forget a lot of artists have suffered very significantly just through the collapse in live and the collapse in session work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right.
Well, I think we have to wrap. There's a lot more exciting stuff going on, and we can move it to the Q&A. I hope the panelists have found that. It's popping up to the right of me. Thank you all for this incredible discussion. I'm both inspired and informed, and I look forward to the rest of today's programming.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. What a great panel. There's a lot of love going on in the chat for the panel as well. So do stick around and answer. I'm sure you're going to get quite a few questions. That was a lovely opening there to the event. So we are going to move right on to our next panel. This is where we focus in now a little more on the impact on marketing. So we've got a great panel lined up, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague and friend, Mr. Joe Sparrow, who edits our Music Ally TV shows, if you've seen those on a Friday. So Joe, over to you, and please do introduce the panelists.
Hello there. Yes, thanks, Paul, and thanks for joining us, everyone. Well, this panel should follow on quite nicely from the previous one. We've taken a look at the sort of overview effect of coronavirus on the industry and the user behavior in it. And so we're going to zoom in now on the effects of coronavirus on marketing in terms of past, present and future effects. So we're going to touch on all those things. And we've got a great panel, as you said. So my name is Joe Sparrow. I am the editor of Music Ally TV here in Berlin. And I'm going to go through our guests in alphabetical order. We've got Aaron Bogucki, head of UK marketing and audience development at AWOL Recordings. Hello, Aaron.
Hello,
thank you for joining us. We have Gaurav Wadhwa, CEO and co-founder of Big Bang Music in India. Hello.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. We've got a very international panel stretching across time zones, which is, so I'm very grateful for you hanging around, Gaurav. And last but by no means least, Niku Sada, Director of Artist and Label Services in the Nordics for The Orchard, and she is in Sweden. Hello, Niku. I think you're still on mute. Maybe we can...
Having some audio problems she posted in the chat.
Ah, okay, right. Can we hear you, Niku?
Hello, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk, but I'm the only one that can't hear anything, I think, when you're talking.
Ah, okay. Well, maybe we can find a solution to that as we keep going. But we can hear you. We can hear you fine. That's great.
Yeah.
So we'll try and find a way through that one as we move on. So perhaps I was going to actually throw the first part of this discussion to Niku, but while we're waiting for her, we're going to we'll go reverse alphabetical then and go to Gaurav straight away. So while we have these three people here, if you've got any questions for them, please use the Q&A button. Hit the button at the bottom of the screen. You can ask them anything. We'll try and get some questions to them if we have time. We only have 35 minutes. So after the session, we're going to ask the panelists to hang around and answer them, some of them by text in the Q&A session as well. So please do pop your answers in there. So Gaurav, let's start with you. We heard in the previous panel about the overall effect of coronavirus on the industry, user behavior, but let's talk about marketing. What have you seen about how the pandemic has affected music marketing practices? What have those effects looked like from your perspective?
Oh, well, of course, it's been more than 6 months now, and I think a large part of the industry has adapted to the new normal. I think initially it was the big change for everyone was the physical access to marketing, which meant going to radio stations to promote your song, going to live experiences, campuses, gigs, and things like that. And I think a large part of the ecosystem here, at least in India, has adapted, and social platforms are huge here. We've in fact had a big change in the scene over the last 2 months where TikTok was banned, as you would have heard, and that resulted in almost 7-8 TikTok clones having launched on the same week. So we're actually, in a situation where the digital music ecosystem is actually bursting, and there's more platforms than music today. But I think it's been a tough time for most businesses. It's been a tough time for artists. It's been a tough time marketing music. But I think there have been a lot of silver linings for us here in India, especially because of the nature of our music ecosystem. We've largely been driven by music from films. 90% of it comes from Bollywood. And because the shoots have stopped and film releases have stopped, that's actually given a rise to a huge independent culture. And it's allowed a lot of streaming platforms to build discovery for independent artists, which they naturally never did because there was so much focus on Bollywood, whether it was homepage placements or playlists and things like that. And I think that's given birth to new genres, new niches. People are discovering new sounds, new artists. There has been a lot of push by streaming. We heard about live streaming in the previous panel. It's been very good for independent artists again, and that's become the new go-to platform for marketing. So I think all in all, it's been a very, very good, conversion from being on the back foot because you couldn't do marketing the normal way to finding new innovations. And I think that's what every industry does, right? When they're up against the wall, they come up with something interesting. So in fact, I'm launching one of my biggest songs till date tomorrow, and we have a very, very interesting way to market. We're just launching a co-branded mask. So we want to. The song's called Unbelievable. We're living in unbelievable times, and we've found new ways to take the song franchise to fans and hopefully monetize it as well.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention, of course. Well, I was going to go to you first, Niku. Let's see how this is happening. Let's throw you in the deep end. So maybe we can unmute you, Niku. So I was saying, what is the? Can you talk about this sort of that overall effect of the pandemic on music marketing practices? What have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Sorry about all of a sudden.
We can hear you perfectly.
Great. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little bit different. It's been interesting for me to follow because I work for a really global company where we keep close in touch. But obviously I'm based in Stockholm, so we're the country that has been slightly kind of differentiated from other territories. So I think that has actually impacted perhaps the way that marketing as well. But I think the main thing that we saw was really like that goes across the board was the awakening of all the labels and artists that kind of have been sleeping a bit or have been hesitant towards social media, and now like realizing how important that is for them. And also the fact that they might have had, a lot of people work 2 jobs, so they might have had one job that was on hold during COVID, and then they can focus on their label business, for example. So that's been kind of a massive difference. And I think that's been the main thing that I've had to, when starting out, when COVID, kind of when everyone was on lockdown, that's been the main thing.
Right.
That
Okay.
you have to focus on.
We'll dig into all these in a minute. Thank you, Niku. And Aaron, last but by no means least, of course, what have you seen in terms of, from your perspective, what are the changes that you've seen? What's the effect been on marketing, music marketing?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads to get through. Just to jump off what Nico just said, I mean, my background and my career has always been with digital marketing and working with artists on developing audiences online. And I've always, what was really interesting at the beginning was, all the things we were trying to get artists to do that maybe they were hesitant to do, now they were forced to do it, which was exciting for me and great to see, but at the same time, it put a lot of pressure on them. And we work with a lot of developing artists, and I noticed very quickly early on, obviously they were dealing with everything we're all dealing with as a people and as a culture globally, but also they have this added pressure to now you're the one that have the keys. You really have to drive this across a number of platforms. So we really saw a lot of platform fatigue, and we still are. But obviously we're all aware of like losing touring and the increase of kind of live streaming gigs. But what we're also seeing is like early on, so 2 or 3 months into the lockdown, CPMs were super cheap. Like brands didn't really know what to do, and I think music marketers and agencies pivoted really quickly, and we were getting really, really cheap CPMs across the world. So we were taking advantage of that. But also what we were seeing is we were seeing a very big increase in YouTube consumption at home amongst families, amongst adults. But also on the other side of that, we lost the commuter listener, which I think we really took for granted, right? In our industry, right? It's like people get on the train or get in their car and they listen to Release Radar, or they listen to Discover Weekly, or they listen to their favorite playlist. And you do see these sort of daily spikes there, and you started to see that really trail off. And it's, I guess, normalized a bit now, but I think we really took that for granted, going into this.
I do think on the other hand, like you said, the commuter listening was kind of that was a bit cut off, but you have this other type of listening that kind of appeared that was interesting, and it could benefit the mood playlist, that kind of music. Of course, being, the people that were working with music that calms you down, or, the nighttime listening, that was quite interesting to see that's kind of have been the effect.
I think that's when you look at, and one of the things I think about, what music needs to lend at this time is that escape, and is that calming, sort of help to the listener. And I think also on the other side of it, I think we'll talk about a little bit about, some of the best albums that have come out. When you look at Dua Lipa, right? That was a dance record. That was a dance party pop record. And I think it gave everyone a really great release they kind of needed, in that time. And I really kind of looked at that as it's a really good example of that release, right? But then when you think about sort of day-to-day marketing stuff, right? When you think about how much it costs to film content right now, or where you can film content right now, right? We have increased costs of PPE, right? We have to move locations for video shoots because we can't fit the amount of people into the shoot that we need to do.
Yeah.
Or we have artists who are higher risk, unfortunately, with underlying health problems that we can't film. So there was a lot of complexity added there. And then Gaurav mentioned as well, there's no in-market promo trips, right? There's no artist meetings at DSPs, right? So we've had to get really creative and even put it back on the artists. Everything. Jonathan, who's a singer of Everything, did a really great video of him walking through a park that was really trippy that we only sent to DSPs. Him talking about why he wrote the record or where the songs are coming from. Those stories would be told in person normally, right? But we had to get really creative and stylized around how we communicated that.
So what we've seen is, sorry, Aaron, is a sort of wholesale change. Of course, a shift in everything societally with coronavirus. But what you've touched on there, and everyone's touched on, is the sort of very quick change in approach, not just through in sort of channels to approach people, but actual creative techniques as well, which actually perhaps used different technologies in different ways, or take advantage of cheap various ways of contacting people, or just a creative to cut through and connect in a time when that's difficult. So perhaps I could sort of quickly go around the three of you and sort of perhaps gauge from you've named a few there, but are there any other campaigns or approaches you've been particularly impressed by? We've sort of seen ones that tie in with perhaps merchandise in terms of the mask and certain artists breaking through because of the genre. But are there any approach? It doesn't have to be a particularly famous example. It could just be an example you think particularly work well and might indicate a way forward. Gaurav, let's start with you again.
Yeah, so I think what we've seen, and again, someone touched upon it in the last panel, is gaming is huge for music marketing in India. Certainly, we've had, of course, a lot of mobile gaming, PUBG being really big, Freeverse, etc. And we're suddenly seeing that there's a growing audience on YouTube, which is consuming gaming content that is now using music into their videos. And we're seeing influencer and marketing agencies in the music space leveraging these cohorts a lot more. We of course don't have Twitch in India, but there's enough on YouTube right now on gaming for us to tap into that. The other example that we're actually working on, and we're very similar to AWOL in our DNA. We also do a lot of brand work between music and brands and artists. We've just cracked a deal with a QSR brand. It's an in-home food delivery service. They created a brand of biryani, which is, chicken and rice, essentially, for those who don't know it. And they've signed up with one of our hip-hop artists. He's one of the pioneers in India. His name is Nazy. And because there was a DNA fit between the brand they were trying to build and the artist, we ended up collaborating at an equity level where all our music goes on to the biryani boxes. So we get, and then we put QR codes there for Spotify, etc. So we suddenly, in a pandemic situation where you cannot go out, you cannot meet, but the food delivery is on a rise and biryani is the most sold food item on delivery, we've suddenly built a new distribution model, which essentially drives discovery. And, the biryani packs can come with, fun lines from his rap or whatever we want to put on it and drive people to the music. So
that's a really fascinating,
That's
a really fascinating example that you've mentioned there, and perhaps perhaps the others have noticed this as well, where artists are able to collaborate with platforms and brands that are perhaps in the past were outside of that ecosystem. People are collaborating with perhaps, like you said, food, apps and delivery services, but also
it's still digitally driven, but it's still an old world, format of marketing. So it's kind of like a hybrid that is getting developed.
We had a similar campaign. We didn't get it out the door, unfortunately, but we had the same thought of like going back to Nico's point about mood is like, how do we, if people are getting food deliveries and, food packets and this kind of Blue Apron type things, how do we create a soundtrack for that, that experience, right? People put on music when they're cooking. So same thing, we're trying to think of the context of the fan and what they were doing at that time and trying to layer in the marketing over that, for sure.
And I also think that comes from the artists themselves as well. Like a lot of people have had time to think and like maybe think about, it's not always the fact that like brands doesn't have to be, it could be thinking about, environmental changes or thinking about what's going on in the world with the Black Lives Matter movement. How can we work with those, how can we I involve myself as an artist with that, where I kind of align with my values. So those type of things where normally you wouldn't see those because you might not, as an artist that is on tour or whatever, might not be having the time to think about it until you're at home.
So what we're seeing is artists and artist teams being highly creative in the ways that they've connected. And I'm sure that it must have been as well as being complicated, but quite an exciting time to be working because you've got lots of opportunities open up for you. One of you, perhaps it was Aaron, I can't remember unfortunately, mentioned a little bit earlier that artists are therefore sort of perhaps they might feel under a bit of pressure to be in lots of different places and to do lots of different collaborations. And all of a sudden, they're sort of feeling that wider pressure more than ever when they're suddenly engaging with all these things in a new way. Do you think that is correct, or is it just how should an artist view this opportunity of all these different types of collaboration and creative activation?
Yeah, I think is it Amaechi, that gentleman before on the panel before, the Run the Jewels manager, made a really good point. It's kind of not every artist is going to act in the same way, and they have to work with their own comfort levels, right? And I think artists are artists, and you can give them the opportunities and put it in front of them. And give them ideas, but at the end of the day, it has to come from an authentic place, right? And so, if you have artists who are, going out and producing live streams on their own, or if they're starting, like Tory Lanez did with Quarantine Radio, where it felt very, very on brand to just, hey, I'm just going to go live on Instagram for a long period of time, play music, chat with my fans. That sometimes comes naturally to some artists. I wish all artists that I work with felt that way, but unfortunately that's not the case, right? So you have to be really, you have to start with the audience. That's what we do, right? We really kind of drill into, you know, the target audiences, what channels and platforms are they on, what affinities do they have, and then layering that over the artist's creativity, the artist's affinities. And a lot of times, going back to what Gaurav said, hopefully it does land on gaming, right? We've got a forthcoming campaign from Unit 6 that one of our marketers is running. It has an incredible rollout of gaming across Twitch over the campaign. It's very central to the campaign. We have a young pop star, Elena Castillo, who's a gamer who goes live on Twitch quite a bit on Animal Crossing. We're building an audience around that. So you have to play to artist strengths, but you have to layer it into the affinities of the audience. Otherwise, you're just kind of, you know, you're kind of all over the place. It's very
Niku, when you know, if you talk to emerging artists or even bigger artists, in the past sometimes they've felt pressure to be on platforms and engaging in a way perhaps that they would not naturally do. They have to do Instagram, but they don't like Instagram. But now what we're seeing is that they can pretty much operate wherever they want as long as they feel comfortable and they find the right place. How do you as a marketer how do you actually work with an artist to say, right, let's find your absolute true authentic self and find the platforms that work for you?
I think it's actually one of the, it's pretty much one of the things that haven't changed, that will always like remain the same, of like picking up the things that an artist is talking about, the things that they're passionate about. Like I said, like they could be movements that were like specific issues that they're passionate about. And that's actually about having, I mean, partly, you know, obviously getting to know the music, and also don't forget the fans, as Aaron mentioned. But I do think I pick it up by the artist themselves, like talking about, they might not think about it in a marketing sense, but they are obviously passionate. They have hobbies, they have things that they do that they are passionate about, and they are actually more open to posting about it nowadays. For some reason, like COVID really brought that kind of, they took away a little bit of like the scaredness that a lot of artists had around social media, which was a good thing.
Why is that? Do you have any idea why that might be? Because I've heard that a number of times from people.
Yeah, I think it was just the fact that you kind of, at first, you felt like you didn't have a choice. That was because you want to be able to connect to people. And if you're stuck at home and you can't connect to people, that is the way that you can connect. If you had that little bit of like, where you could go out and you could go for coffee or whatever, you might not, or if you were busy with a tour, you might not have thought about those things. Actually realize the benefits of connecting with your audience directly on a platform, and that it doesn't have to be what a lot of artists, for example, might see as like salesy. It could be, it's just them, you know, connecting to their audience. And I feel like that's been an inner desire that have come out more prevalent.
Yeah. Does the panel think
that
this sort
of... If I may add to that.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
you know, We've actually had a very interesting situation in India because of the number of platforms. I think to Niku's point, one, I think artists have a lot more time in the pandemic, right? So they started thinking about these things. And I think initially we saw a lot of artists they just want to take a break, and a lot of them, you know, tour very heavily. But I think as they started getting more time on hand, they started developing an affinity for platforms. And the other thing that happened was that they started realizing that if they are not on these platforms, they are going to lose relevance. So it's no longer about anything else but survival by virtue of being relevant. And they started seeing other artists who were either already big on social platforms. They did not lose monetization because of live, because brands started working a lot more with them, or it was these live streaming platforms like Instagram and all of the others who started working with these digitally savvy artists. And I think a lot of the artists started realizing they'll become irrelevant, and they were forced to adopt some of these platforms. And then we have such a vast choice that people can actually pick platforms based on what fits their DNA versus just going to TikTok and just hating it. So that really helped. And then of course now we're in a situation where all these platforms are paying top dollar to these artists to come onto the platform. So it's a new revenue stream that they just cannot ignore, because live has literally gone out of the window. So I think it's a combination of these things that have really made everyone, not just artists, brands as well, really adopt digital. It's just not a choice anymore.
Aaron, I think you had
and really to your point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Niku.
I wanted to say to your point, like the fact that they're thinking about their revenue streams, and transparency becomes super important when it comes to this. Like you're actually seeing, okay, what's actually coming in, and what it makes it more important, because with touring, you might not have noticed that as much, but when that is your only option, then you're thinking about those type of things, what's actually happening more.
Yeah, I think just this all fits in exactly with the point I was going to make, which is, we're talking about, live and touring completely disappearing for all artists, right? Mostly. And we work with a lot of developing artists, young artists who are still working on who they are as an artist and developing that brand and how they want to engage with their audiences. And I think revenue is a massive part of what's being taken away from these artists. But I think what we really also have to think about is, and it plays to the social side as well. Everything that happens around a tour for a young artist is so important, right? Being on stage, trying your music out, playing it for audiences, seeing what works, what doesn't work, what gets a reaction, things that happen on off stage, right? On the bus, when you're being fed, there's those stories happen. That's where songs get written, right? Like there's so many other organic things that happen around a show for an artist that helps them develop. And I think that's one of the things that we're seeing young artists missing right now, right? And you're not going to sit on Twitch and develop as an artist. You're not going to, you might write a song about Twitch. I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe it's a hit, right? But at the end of the day, like, I really don't believe that an artist sitting on Twitch or sitting on these live stream platforms, although it might be great to engage an audience, it doesn't further your sort of creative development or your personal artist development.
Do you think
I do have to actually, I have a counter argument on there. But
good, I was hoping someone would. That's what I was going to ask for, so go ahead.
I was just thinking, because I've seen so many artists being creative with on TikTok. I think Nina Nesbitt has been like amazing during quarantine. She's coming up with these like little funny tracks and songs, and I think obviously that comes from her creativity and connecting with the audience as well that way. But yeah, I thought that's stuff that I've seen.
Yeah, sure.
Live, as Aaron says, has historically been an enormous part of the music industry in terms of marketing, in that it allows people to go to places and play, of course, but also develop as an artist. And that is something which will still be important. But could we be entering a sort of phase, you think, where from perhaps a marketing and artist development perspective, actually artists might develop into different types of performance? Maybe online performance. Like you say, Aaron, maybe, yeah, I mean, not many people want to hear songs about being on Twitch. Just like we don't like rock stars. We don't really like hearing rock stars sing that much about how difficult it is being on the road and being a millionaire rock star. But could we be entering a period where that kind of, there's some sort of marketing and artist development by performing in a new sort of way online? Gaurav, let's go to you.
Yeah, I definitely see that change will happen. I mean, we're seeing this 15-second phenomenon, which is thanks to TikTok and similar platforms. I'm seeing a lot of producers. So in fact, earlier, the songs in India would be about 3.5 minutes. They've kind of gone down to about 1.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes. But what we're now seeing is that artists are creating 15-second demos, because a lot of the bigger songs in the market are getting discovered by the 15-second sound on platforms like TikTok. So people are definitely changing their styles of making music. They're changing sounds basis, what is working on platforms. Earlier, it used to be what worked on radio, what worked on, live, but now it's like they're also taking into account what works as a 15-second sound. We have an artist called Conqueror, I think from the Caribbean, who created a song called Banana, and it did 2 billion views on TikTok in India. Nobody had heard that song, but they had heard that 15-second clip, which he didn't even know that clip is going to go so big. And now Conqueror wants to collaborate with Indian artists because he realizes that he's one of the most streamed Indian artists who's not even available on Spotify, by the way, because his label doesn't distribute to India. So it's a crazy world out there, and you never know what formats start building out from just platform out kind of approach.
So, we've got 10 minutes left, and there's two things I want to do really, which is I want to have a look, I want to sort of move the conversation towards what is the future going to look like in that. But there's one question perhaps I can drag in from the Q&A section. If you do have any questions, please hit the Q&A button and pop them in there. And it goes to perhaps what you were saying just then, Gaurav, and what you're all touching on. It's good to have an international panel to ask this question too. How has the increased access, everyone is artists are at home and accessing the world everywhere. Has that affected, now that they're sort of more obviously and forced to interact with the world simultaneously, has that affected how an artist campaign is rolled out internationally? Niku, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I think it's one of those things where there's like two forces against each other. So that what Aaron mentioned before with in-market promo activities and like opportunities kind of disappear, but that gives you a whole other access of like for an artist to think about. And especially when you have a live stream, you can have anyone watching, and like what they were talking about, the other panel as well, access is key. And I think that's been super. I think actually one of the main things has been that you also think about incorporating those things in pretty much every marketing campaign, because there is no other option. So I think that it does open up a whole new world, and it kind of makes it that you can bring in an artist that perhaps because of the costs or whatever from before, you wouldn't focus on, and you focus on them earlier in other markets because you are waiting on building it up in the profile market first, but now you have the access. So if you're seeing something, if you're seeing people reacting or fans coming in from, even if it's a little bit, you can actually work on building that out.
Great. Aaron, what do you think about that, about hitting the international?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm really proud of the international team we have at AWOL. That we really do from day one really do focus on many markets, not just UK or US. And so we do, like at the very beginning, a lot of homework, a lot of market research, a lot of working with our teams globally to really identify which markets need focus, and then really deep, either hiring teams on the ground or creating specific content there. What I love doing and working with our international team is even some of our media, Spotify advertising, getting really creative with the audio that's in there. We're really obsessed with making sure that, we're speaking in the right languages. We get the artist to kind of say hello in the local language on the Spotify ad, because we know it might perk someone's ears up a bit more than just saying hello in English. So we really do focus on that, from the beginning. But yeah, to Nico's point, right? Like, music is accessible everywhere, and we're just seeing, and I think goes back to Chaz's point on the previous panel with trigger cities. Again, that's something that we've been looking at for a long time, and we really enjoy testing things out, right? And finding, trigger markets, and he's talking about trigger audiences as well, and we've spoken to Chaz about there. But with Lauv and a lot of the pop stuff that we have, and some of the bedroom pop stuff, Philippines are mad for that type of sound. And we know that if we go to Manila and we focus on there early, we can drive algorithms, which is going to drive more discoverability across the platform, right, in other parts of Southeast Asia, so Thailand, Indonesia. And I think this is all kind of common knowledge now, and India, of course, as well. But, we look at those as sort of like test markets almost before we kind of move things into other areas. But yeah, you have to think globally from day one, otherwise I think you're missing.
But what's interesting is that there's just two movements happening at the same time. So you have, like, when we're working and all of our teams are going towards one goal, and you have BTS and Bad Bunny, like that works globally. But then you also have local hip hop that is super regional, and like we were saying, like you can have those, and that might not spread over borders. So there's this like two simultaneous movements that are happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the future then. We've sort of discussed the effects and the really good things we're seeing now, and the changes and the challenges that you faced. What is the future of music marketing going to look like? I'm not asking you to predict how coronavirus is going to play out, though. If you do know, let us know. But I mean, someone needs to know. But I mean, what do you think this change is now permanent, in terms of we have a much more diversified and fragmented music marketing marketplace? Nico, as you said, that you've got simultaneous streams happening, and what is that going to look like in the future, and is that advantageous? Gaurav, let's start with you again.
We also have an interesting Q&A question. We could probably take it after this. But I feel like I'd like to believe that this is not the normal. We will go back to how it was earlier, with a lot more live and human interaction, and hopefully the new adoption on digital will add back to that. So I think it's still early days to really predict how it will be. I think the only thing we can do as artists and labels and music marketeers is just keep evolving and keep putting the music out in whichever way we can, and I think everyone will find a way to evolve with time. I don't really have a prediction of whether this is the future or not.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I apologize. I mean, you, Gaurav, are operating in an extremely exciting and rapidly evolving space in India. Do you think that these new streams of income that you're marketing to are actually going to augment what was there before? So you're going to have a much bigger pie to take a slice from in the end.
For sure, because I think what a lot of companies like us are also moving towards is creating artist brands, and as independent music becomes bigger, they bring in more opportunities for revenue across. Otherwise, it's always been film music breaking in the moolah and not really sharing it with anyone. But now with merchandise and other forms, it's going to become much larger. And I think also live has never been a big revenue spinner for artists in India. It's really just something that exists more for the experience. So I think even on live and the integration to live streaming, ticketing is becoming much larger. So I feel that pandemic is going to force the ecosystem to help make money for the artists in the long run. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Gaurav. Niku, same for you. Without, it's a big question, but how does the future look from your perspective, and is there more to play with now?
I think to continue on that, when you're looking at revenue streams, I think we're already there was talks, there's been talks for years about, tipping systems, or for a long time it was only Twitch and YouTube that had kind of like the fan funding system, where you can kind of see it. Obviously it's not, it's COVID related, but you can in a way see it on Spotify. You can definitely see it on Facebook with the stars. So like, I think that's coming, because we need to, generate those type of income streams. And I also think, I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but artists have had time to think, and I think it's because I'm, we're going through it as an organization that's really focused on it as well. But in terms of like social justice issues and actually standing for something, and reflecting over and having, transparency across a whole company, that also important.
And I guess that extends to the character of the artist as well. People are really genuinely interested in what an artist is really like and what they really mean. Yeah, great. Thanks, Niku. And Aaron, what, from your perspective, how does it look? What is the next phase like?
I think it's important to remember like how adaptable musicians, artists, and their teams are, right? Like over the last 20 plus years, like our industry was disrupted arguably first by digital technology, right? Very early. Struggled with it for a bit, kind of got a handle on it. Feel like we're getting a bit of a handle on it now in the pandemic. But yeah, I think it's important to like trust artists, trust their teams to adapt to take advantage of whatever technology is out there. I think the panelists and you were right, Joe. I think there's a lot of fragmentation of audiences. There's a lot of different places to go and engage, but the basics, I believe, are still there, right? Like go build an audience somewhere, go build an audience on social, wherever it might be, but bring them into a place where you can own that data. That's really important. And I think it's easily lost sometimes. I mean, we can argue about the power of email, but we can look at SMS, we can look at someplace where, you're not renting audiences. Like you're renting audiences on Twitch, you're renting audiences on Instagram and Facebook or wherever you might be there. You don't own those audiences. What you should be doing is build engagement and building a following, but give them a reason to follow you someplace where you can own and monetize that data, right? And I think Gaurav, your face mask, right, is a good example, right? Print on demand is super easy and cheap to do now, right? If you have a strong fan base and you've got a cool new song coming out, or you've got some cool meme that happened that your fans wrote in Twitter or wherever else, make merch items out of it, sell it. Like, I hate to do this, but look at how YouTubers do it, right? YouTubers are like, they create new brands, new stuff all the time, and they're monetizing all the time. Don't be shameless, be smart.
Be smart. Great. And I hate to do this. Great advice. Thanks, Aaron. We have 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask you the total last minute question. One word answers only, please. Are we entering into a more exciting marketing period post-coronavirus? Niku, let's start with you.
Yes. I'm going to go for yes, if you only want one.
Gaurav.
Absolutely yes.
Absolutely yes. That's perfect. And Aaron.
Indeed, for sure. Yes.
Fabulous. Good news. Good news. Okay, thanks everybody. Now, that was a really fascinating panel. There are loads of really good questions in the Q&A, and our panelists are kindly going to hang around a bit after I finished, and we've all finished in a few minutes, and they're going to answer them by text. So please hang around, everybody, in the Q&A, and you will get your answers. So Aaron, Gaurav, Niku, thank you ever so much for joining us. I've been Joe Sparrow in Berlin, and back to Paul.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everyone. That was another excellent panel. Well done. So yes, guys, if you can stick around, they will try and answer those questions in the Q&A. We're going into our last part of the day today, and just a couple of other viewpoints, basically, to think about some of the things that have happened with COVID and what we kind of, what we need to care about more. That was the idea little section. In a moment, we'll be hearing from Ana Rodriguez, who is the co-chair of the International Music Managers Forum in Mexico and an artist manager herself. She is going to be talking about the importance of live venues and, of course, some of the devastating impact that COVID has had on that sector and the current situation in Mexico. But first, we are going to go to Japan and hear from Tatsuya Nomura. He is the president of FMPJ, which is the independent trade body for managers and labels in Japan. And he is going to give us a little bit of an update and focusing on very much, though, the transition from physical to digital and how that has been accelerated by the recent impact of COVID.
日本の場合は、2月の26日から、ライブが、自粛要請が政府から出ました。でそこから、一切、ほとんどライブができない状況になりました。その中で一番危機感を感じてたのは、じゃあその部分のライブができなくなったっていうところを、じゃあ、複製ビジネスであるレコーディングした音源をどういうふうに売っていくかってことにおいて、ちょうどそのタイミングで日本はまだフィジカルの方がストリーミングよりシェアが大きい状況ではあったんですが、フィジカルは下がってるちょうど最中、フィジカルストリーミングがまだ上がらない状況の中で、ここの複製ビジネスに頼るってことに対しての信頼感が非常に低い状態だったというのが、非常に日本の音楽エンターテインメントの中では厳しいタイミングでコロナになってしまったというのが一番大きかったです。で、ライブビジネスに関しては本当に上り坂、右肩上がりでどんどん増えていく状況だったんですが、これがパタッとなくなってほぼゼロになっていったという部分では、タイミングが非常に悪かったなと思ってます。でその中で、いろいろと試行錯誤をしながら、いろんなことを考えていく音楽業界人、日本の音楽業界のスタッフが出てきてます。海外に向けて、やっぱり自分たちのそこら辺の自己反省っていうのが、非常に出てきたなと思うのは、隣の国の韓国なんかに比べると、例えば、BTS とかブラックピンクみたいなそういうアーティストが、海外にライブ配信、オンラインのライブ配信をしたというところで、数十万人ものチケット、数十万枚ものチケットを売って、世界中の人たちがそれを見て、収益化しているというようなモデルの成功例が耳に入ってきてたりします。そういうことを見ると、いかに日本のアーティストがそういうことに対してグローバル目線を失ってたかっていうのがよく分かったっていうのがすごく痛感した状況だったというふうに今日本の音楽業界は考えてます。そういったことも含めて日本の音楽コンテンツをいかに海外に流通させていくかってことに今シフト、目線を向けてます。で今までは日本の音楽だったりアーティストっていうのは国内市場を、見ていけば、そこで、ビジネスが成り立ってたというような状況だったんですけども、フィジカルビジネスの、スキームが崩れてストリーミングビジネスになった時に、何を考えなきゃいけないかというと、国内市場だけを目指しているだけでは、複製ビジネスは成立しないっていうところに、気がついてきています。という意味も含めて、世界に通じる日本のアーティスト、日本の音楽コンテンツを出していかなければいけない状況になってきているというのが一番喫緊の課題として我々に課せられている問題だなというふうに思ってます。今までは日本の音楽やエンターテインメントは国内でそれなりに国内マーケットで成立してたっていう部分にあぐらをかきすぎてて、海外市場をほとんど考えたり意識することがなかったんですけども、そこが、このコロナにおいて急に、海外市場を目指していこうというような目線に変わってきているのはこれから、期待できることだと思うし、そこの部分においてみんなの、日本の音楽業界の意欲がそこに向かい始めてきているなという部分では今後の日本の音楽業界にとっては、未来、希望が持てるかなという部分です。先日8月の上旬、第1週目に、日本でも、ビッグセールスを稼ぐアーティストで米津玄師というアーティストがいますが、 米津玄師がストリーミングで一気に過去の音源も含めて新譜も含めて音源をストリーミングで解禁しました。これは大きな出来事で、日本の音楽業界も今までのフィジカルビジネスからストリーミングの方向に一気にシフトするというようなきっかけになると思います。これからはストリーミングで音楽を発表していって表現していって、そこで一人でも多く、一人でも一回でも多く海外の人にも含めて聴いてもらえるような音楽っていうのを目指しながら作っていく、もしくは僕らがそれをバックアップしていくというような形になっていくと思います。日本のオンラインライブに関してはまだまだ発展途上だと思ってます。そもそもオンラインライブに関しては世界的にもまだまだ発展途上だとは思いますけども、今いろいろなアーティストがその単純に今までやってきたステージ上のライブパフォーマンスをオンライン上で流すっていうことの表現方法が一つだったとして、別にそのオンラインライブそのものをどう作品化していこうかっていう部分での表現に取り組んでいる人たちもたくさんいます。フォートナイトというゲームソフトの中でその中でライブパフォーマンスをするようなというようなことは、一つで言えば今までのステージ上でライブをやってたものを単純にオンラインの中に流していくっていうこととはまた違うアプローチだと思いますし、他にも今度サカナクションという日本のアーティストはオンラインライブ用にステージングというよりはミュージックビデオをライブ化していったようなアプローチの中でライブストリーミングをするというようなことに挑戦したりとか、音源を 3D 音源に変えたりとか、そういった工夫をしてオンラインライブの可能性を探っていったりしてます。ザ・フィーンというアーティストは日本でオンラインライブをやって約1000人の視聴者だったんですけども、1週間後に中国に持ってったら中国では約20万人の人たちが見てくれました。そういった部分もやっぱり日本のアーティストが今後欧米だけじゃなくてアジアでの展開っていう部分で広く可能性があるんではないかという部分を知ることができたことは大きな収穫だと思ってます。
Why we need to care more about live venues? Because the most important thing about them is the cultural impact on local communities and the role they have as foundation for talent and launchpad for acts that get known globally. And their future remains uncertain. So this really makes me nervous, because for a band to develop their audience and to get experience to transcend with their show, they need to be on stage during the early days. There is no shortcuts for this part of the process. Even for the biggest music industry with massive festivals and successful international promoters, it is necessary that these independent spaces exist. It is essential that live venues function as incubators for new acts. So with the COVID crisis, venues had been closed for approximately 6 months. In some places, they began to reopen with reduced capacity, but expenses had been accumulating, and the business model is built into the ticket price. And that's a challenge for everyone involved. We cannot be thinking on transferring the loss of income due to capacity to the fees of the artist or the crew in the venue. This really involves complex rescue ideas. And I think it's a challenge for the entire industry. Can you imagine what will happen if most venues in our towns close for good? Local economies will be affected. Venues are economy multipliers driving revenue to other sectors like restaurants and hotels and transportations and backline retailers and catering. I mean, just to mention a few. And if we talk about the impact of permanent closing on the music ecosystem, things get scarier, because we're talking about artists, managers, agents, stagehands, the whole production industry, media, advertising, record companies, publishers. I mean, everyone will be affected. Also, there is another layer on this. Employers in the venues are usually highly trained, and their work is almost impossible to be done in any other industry. And on top of that, in many countries like mine, workers from the music industry are not eligible for government support. They don't even have social security. So the closure of venues could be devastating for music, for local communities and music fans. Thinking of what we can do, well, first of all, if you are a music fan, go to the website of your local venue and check if there is any fundraising going on, donate and support the group. In addition, if you are in the line of work that can access reopening guidelines for music venues, share them. I mean, I know there's no universal rules for it because every venue is different, and that complicates the issue a little bit more. If you have the possibility to let policymakers know about your concern, do so. Not every country has an organization for venues. So for example, NIVA, the National Independent Venue Association in the United States, they did a brilliant work because they went to a coalition of other organizations that were a little bit more robust and that had access to policymakers. So they helped them to get where they needed. And now DC knows who NIVA is. We need to pay attention to live venues, independent clubs and community theaters, because they are truly the lifeblood for the whole music ecosystem. In simple words, music cannot inspire future generations if we keep losing independent venues.
So, thank you to Anna and thank you to Tatsuya for those thoughts, and thank you indeed to all of the speakers who took part in our first day. I really hope you enjoyed it half as much as I did. That was excellent. Really, really good start. So just a few reminders, by the way. I think we're going to be popping some information in the chat. Again, just to remind you, if you're interested in subscribing, got the details on there. We're going to post a link to the online directory. Do please register your details on there. There are actually a few slots. We've had some cancellations, so if you grab them right now, I think you can get one of the last places for the networking roulette, which will be starting up very shortly. And then, of course, do remember the other events, meeting the startups, meeting the sponsors. So there's still some sessions left there. If you want to meet MQA, Chartmetric, Linkfire ourselves, do book your one-to-one session on there as well. So that's it for day one, and let's just have a little quick look at what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Tomorrow the theme is artists as entrepreneurs, and the idea here being really to look at this sort of trend of the power shift that has taken place towards artists. And we kick off with a fabulous interview. I've seen it already and it's really good, with K-Camp and Genius, so don't miss that. Then I will be talking with Troy Carter from Q&A, Denzel Ferguson from Platoon, two of the most interesting companies that service artists these days. Then my good friend Jake Beaumont Nesbitt will be chairing a panel of managers looking at these new routes to market and you know what managers can do to take most advantage of the new opportunities. And then we end the day with presentations from Co-Write, Show for Me, Zebra and Fanaply, 4 startups, and then you will get the opportunity to meet them all after that. So do come back again, those of you who are about to experience the networking roulette. I hope it's a lot of fun, and yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Thanks very much, everybody.